I always tell my students that a good way to practice is recording yourself, so I want to record myself for that. Anyway, let's move on. I do have a disclaimer here because it was my first time presenting. I've never done this before, so I was like, okay, I'm going to use a little bit of AI to brainstorm what's the structure, what should I use. So I have an AI disclaimer. I did use AI for brainstorming, generating some practice exercises, and refining the title. That's why I was like, no, I don't like this. I want to refine it. I want to make it better. And while AI tools were used to enhance the content, all materials have been carefully reviewed and edited by me to ensure accuracy, coherence, and educational relevance. And if there's any mistakes, they're all mine, they're not AI's. All right, it's just a disclaimer. I think that's the most responsible thing to do, right? When you use AI in education. So if you have any questions of in which areas did I use AI, feel free to ask, all right? What do I hope to achieve today? Well, before I get into that, I want to start off with a poem because I was reading a lot because I realized that I'm not very knowledgeable about Taíno culture, which is kind of like a sad thing because it's not in our curriculum, strictly speaking, right? We have a lot of books in our classrooms that are not strictly, about our culture, our African culture, our Taíno culture, or even it's mostly based on they are Spanish or Spaniards, right? That's what we learn in history class. But then I was reading an article on Columbus and the Taíno people. It's on a website called Zin Education Project, and the author, I forgot the name, didn't write it here, quoted a poem, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting poem. Let me go look for it. He translated it to English, but I liked the Spanish version more, The Nobodies, Los Nadie, un poema by Eduardo Galeano. Los Nadies, que no hablan idiomas, sino dialectos, que no profesan religiones, sino supersticiones, que no hacen arte, sino artesanía, que no practican cultura, sino folclore. Los nadies, que cuentan menos que la bala que los mata, right? I don't know if there's any reactions. I would like this room to be interactive, but I wrote here that this poem reflects the way we view indigenous cultures, especially our Taíno culture, right? So los Navi, we kind of don't know anything about them because they were basically not eradicated, that's a myth. We're talking about myths, so that's a myth that Taíno culture was erased or eradicated. We still have it in our blood. And it's important to teach not just language, but culture and history of our people, of our ancestors who lived here. We're right here in Ponce, or in Guayama, or San Germán, or Macao, Utuado, wherever it is that you're from, they were here before us. This is their land. We're just, living in their land, and we need to reconnect, as Ms. Esquedolina said, with our roots, with our identity, with our Boricua roots. I don't know if you noticed that I wrote in the title Boricua. Why Boricua? Because this is Boriquen. Before it was Puerto Rico, it was Boriquen, right? And I really like that word because I consider myself more than Puerto Rican, Boricua. And what I want to encourage you today is to integrate Boricua culture into your teaching practice. I want to provide teachers with a bilingual Taíno myth that is easy to incorporate into your classes from 6th grade up to 12th grade, and create English learning activities with a Taíno myth with my peers. All right, let's get right into it. Let's read the myth. I have 2 questions before I start for you guys. Why teach myths or legends in the EFL or ESL classroom? Has anyone taught a myth before? If they were a legend, you want to share your experience? Why did you teach it?
I can say as a professor, I always get myself into these situations.
Go ahead.
I can say as a professor, I used to have the advanced introduction to literature courses, and one of the things I would tell my former students, I'm retired now, is that we have to know our authors on the island. We have to know their literature. Even and in my class, even though it was an English course, they could read in Spanish. And they will work with me the outline of that course in English. They would write, they will discuss, they will debate, whatever it is that we were doing, they could do that in the language that they were working in. But the essence, the content, as Dorina was mentioning, it's the same. It's the same. So again, we need to let our students learn about our authors, the writers that make us Boricuas, and very proud. I return this mic.
Okay. And then my second question is, what do you guys know about the Taíno or their myths? Before I give you the myth, because I'm going to give you the myth right now. Does anyone know any myths, any legends about Taínos that you'd like to share? What do you know about Taínos? Punto. Like, this is, if you were teaching this class, you would ask your students, hey, what do you know about the Taínos? That they drown? Uh-huh. Okay, what else? What else do you know?
Well, I am currently an elementary teacher right now, and I teach third grade. And in third grade, the first unit is about Puerto Rico unique. And I always like to start the unit with my students with a legend of how the coqui animal came to be in Puerto Rico. And it's titled Coqui and the Goddess. And Coqui, according to the legend, was a Taíno warrior that fell in love with the goddess. And the name of the goddess, I really don't remember right now, but oh, okay. The thing is that, in the legend, Coqui has to fight with Huracan. And in Huracan, it wins the battle, and Coqui passes away. And the goddess starts crying and crying and crying, and a big flood comes to Puerto Rico and all that. And in remembrance of the Taíno warrior and of her lover, because she loved the Coqui Taíno very much, she created the little tree frog and named him Coqui. And that's why he says Coqui, Coqui, according to the legend.
Excellent. Very good. And I want you to notice that when he was talking about, he was speaking in English. He didn't use Spanish, but he used Spanish words, kind of technically Taíno words, right? Coqui, and what was the other word? Huracán. And that's going to be one of the words in our myth. Over here.
Well, I am a really proud Boricua. My name is actually Loaiza. It comes from the cacique of Loaiza Aldea. She was I don't know how to say matriarcal in English. So, era de matriarch. So what we did it like Loaiza, she killed herself. She burned herself when the Spaniard came in. And Yuitza is her daughter, who actually was another cacique in Puerto Rico. And people don't talk about her. And she also burned herself because they never give up. Taíno didn't give up. And that's, you can go over Canovanas. All the history is just right there. And I'm a proud Loaiza, which actually the Loa is an oda, is a call for the wind. So es la oda al viento.
That is so interesting. See? Anyone else have a name similar that they want to share their story about their name that comes from the Taíno culture? Perhaps? No? Okay. Anyone else who knows something else that somebody didn't say about Taínos?
Some of our towns on the island have Taíno names, and definitely Loíza and Guayama and many others.
Yes, exactly.
What happens is, as language teachers, we think of those readings like so de estudios sociales. But as English teachers, we have the, I think we could integrate those readings into our English classes, no matter the grade. And I think today's topic is about that, integration of culture into English language. It connects, yes, exactly. So I think what what we need to do is look at the materials that, even if it's not in the scope or sequence of the department, you need to integrate that. Because giving, and that could happen for English classrooms and dual language classrooms and all classrooms, to use the history of Taínos, because I think we do a lot of La Semana de la Puertorriqueñidad, but that's just not enough, and we do it in Spanish. So having our students being bilingual, we also want them to be biliterate, and that's an opportunity when we bring in stories like the Taínos. Y nos olvidamos también de los africanos y los españoles, but we don't do too much with the Taínos. So I commend you for what you're doing, because a lot of people do not focus on the Taínos. Siempre nos enfocamos en la bomba y la plena y la danza de España, pero se olvidan de mis ancestros. Pues yo soy taíno, mi abuela es bien taína, exacto.
And I want to say, go ahead, Mirza.
I want to share my experience. Sometimes I talk about the Taínos in my classroom, but in my personal experience, my older daughter, she has a name that is an Arawak name that is where Taínos come from in Venezuela. My second daughter, her name is Ana. In Taíno, it means flower. And my third girl, her name is Atabey. It's a Taíno name, and that means the mother of Yukiyu and Huracan. So I just want to share that. So my daughters, they have Taíno names.
All right, awesome. Anyone else? Because this is your workshop, not my workshop. Excellent. So, I want you guys to read it, because we don't have a lot of time to read it out loud. I wanted to do a read aloud, but I'm gonna give you 2 minutes. Or should we do like partially reading out loud? Again, the ending is so good. I mean, it's a short one. Should we read it out loud? La creación. So I distributed. There's some people who have the start at the beginning. Who wants to read that part? Someone over here.
When the Spaniards arrived in Puerto Rico, they found Indians called Taínos. The Taínos had their own culture, their own language, and their own traditions. They also had enemies, the Caribs, a tribe from South America. The Caribs have occupied other islands southeast of Puerto Rico, and they were beginning to invade Puerto Rico also. This legend has to do with one of the beliefs of the Taínos. The appendix on page provides more details about the Taíno culture.
So you have a bibliography on the handout that I gave you. You're gonna have the PDF version of the myth. Okay, I wanted to save on copy, so I didn't print out the beginning, this page, which is, yeah, that's what she read, the introduction, right. So let's read the myth. I think it's short enough to read it, and then we'll get into the activities that I created with this myth. There's a lot of theory that I was gonna mention, but I don't think we have a lot of time for it, so let's just read the myth. Any volunteers? Okay, here we go.
In the beginning, Atabey created the heavens, the earth, and other celestial bodies. Atabey had always existed. Atabey was the original mother. Atabey was the powerful creator. But there was no life. There was no light. Everything existed as in a deep sleep. And so it was for a long time. Atabey finally realized that something was missing. She had 2 sons whom she crafted out of magical, invisible elements. The 2 sons were named Yugahu and Wakar. Yugahu was preoccupied with the absence of light and life. Atabey was content because Yugahu could now finish what she had started. And Yugahu created the sun and the moon to illuminate the earth. He took precious stones from the earth and placed them in the sky. These stones helped the moon illuminate the night. The earth was fertile, and from it grew plants and trees. Yugahu then created animals and birds to live among the plants and trees. Then Yukahu decided to create something new, something different, a cross between an animal and a god. In this way, the first man and soul, or Hubia, was created. He called the first man Lokuo. Lokuo was happy on earth with all the beauty that surrounded him. He knelt before Yukahu to offer thanks. Wakar looked with envy at all his brother had created. He stole away to a secluded place and did nothing for a while. But his envy overcame him, and he began to taint the creations of his brother. He changed his name, becoming the terrible god of evil, Huracan. Huracan carried the winds. Sometimes he carried them with such force that they destroyed what Yukahu had created. He uprooted trees and killed animals. Lokuo's happiness turned to fear. He could no longer enjoy the beauty of nature. In addition to sending powerful winds, Huracan made the earth tremble. This was one of his favorite games. During one of the most powerful quakes, the American continent divided in two. That is how the Antilles came to be.
Someone else can finish reading? Yeah, go ahead.
But Lokuo continued living on the earth, and Yukaju created other gods to help him. Lokuo learned to create images of these gods, which he called semis. Yukaju presented Lokuo with fire, and he learned to cook his own food. He learned to make cassava from yucca, but Lokuo lived alone on earth. One day, inspired by so much natural beauty, he pried upon his belly, buttoned and gave way to two things in the likeness, a man and a woman. The man was named Wakuyona, and the woman Yaya. The descendants of these two people populated the earth, but the descendants of Wakuyona and Yaya suffered immensely with the floods and strong winds from Huracan sent. And he sent maboyas, or evil spirits, that caused problems in the lives of the people. The maboyas destroyed the canoes in the river, threw stones upon homes, and hit the ball with which people were playing. They also brought illness and strife to the people. This is how the Taínos explain natural phenomena and the origin of good and evil. The Caribs, who arrived from islands southwest of Puerto Rico, were evil. They were fierce warriors who destroyed entire villages and kidnapped the women. The Caribs were considered messengers of Huracan. And if Huracan sent the Caribs, perhaps Yukaju sent good people to help expel the Caribs. Therefore, when the Spaniards arrived in Puerto Rico, the Taínos no doubt thought that they were sent by Yukaju. They were wrong.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so I also handed out something that I did. I actually taught this, I think it was pre-pandemic and during the pandemic as well. So looking back on what I did, I handed out, I wish I could have improved it, but let's talk about, let me see, what words or ideas stood out for you from the myth? Anything that was curious or interesting? Maybe the ending. For me, was the ending. Huh? How did you feel?
I feel that most of it, the Taínos were very, very scared of the Spaniards, but most of all, the history of the Taínos were suffering. They were suffering in every kind of way that we see it. And the Taínos were very honest, and they were very spontaneous in what they do. But in this case, the Spaniards, they had a rebellion with them, and they were no doubt.
Any other reactions?
I think it's more like a trigger for me, and I know it's a harsh word to say, it's abused sometimes, but how indigenous peoples, even in American history, there was a trust of the Savior based on their own faith, and that trust was so broken by the colonization, the what is going on, and just the attacks of the people, and to destroy a people, and yet the innocence of ignorance that they actually thought that these people, based on their faith, was a savior, when in fact it was a killer.
Yes.
And I think I'm so impacted and hurt by that because it's still happening today in marginalized cultures. As someone who belongs to a dominant culture, there is this sense of like sadness, like we haven't learned. We haven't learned. And so I'm angry at the end of it to the point where I feel like I need to be an activist and learn more.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Indignación, that's what the word that comes out to me. Anybody else? Another question. What connections can you make between this myth and other myths or legends that you know? Does this remind you of anything that you've heard before, this myth? Uh-huh.
So we were having a discussion here at our table that it reminds about the story of Cain and Abel, the two brothers, with the envy. So,
Over here?
No problem. I find it very interesting. I think that if we want to take this probably a step further, I would also, after, of course, being this the first myth, I would take advantage. There's a myth by an ethnographer, James Mooney, who collected Cherokee myths, and he published them, and he has one which I usually teach at the very beginning in American Survey course, which is how the world was made. And there's a lot of connection here. And for those of you that may be in a Catholic school, Genesis, the Bible, okay, so you can probably take these three sources and have the students look at the common aspects that are there and what is different, and I think it would be something very interesting. So thank you for sharing this.
Comparative literature, right? We could compare two myths, because I realized that I've taught myths before, but never a Taíno or Puerto Rican myth. Oh, turn it. So I did want to touch upon real quickly, I'm gonna time myself 2 minutes to talk about theory. 2 minutes. Okay, because we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to say that this is something, teaching myth or teaching about culture in the English classroom is something that has been talked about in academia. It's been written about as well. I picked 3 theoretical frameworks to base it on: identity and power in language learning, using code meshing to support language learning, and teaching through strength, asset-based pedagogies. And I'll go really quickly through this because I kind of want to get into the creating another activity. But basically, identity and power, my notes were that sometimes students, and Mrs. Dorina said this, students are highly motivated to learn English, but maybe our classroom practices or our languaging practices in our classroom do not meet those needs, or they feel maybe that they're, how can I say this? Okay, for example, in the classroom, sometimes I notice that there's a lot of students who stay silent, who refuse to speak in English. And something that I read in Norton and Tuhi's article that impacted me was, she was quoting, or they were quoting a study, and it said these words: silence protects them from humiliation. And I'm thinking, like, what are the language practices that we're using in our classroom? Are we empowering our students? Are we aware of the power relations that we have here? Because, English is not their main language, it's Spanish. So we have to be aware of that, and perhaps, maybe any classroom practices that might affect them. For example, their socioeconomic status. Maybe they come from poorer neighborhoods and they never had the resources to practice English, or maybe it's about, There's issues of race, there's issues of gender, of how boys and girls speak differently in English, maybe even migrant status or sexual orientation. There's a lot of things going on in the classroom with relation to power and as well as identity. Something else that I wrote here is that language learning is a social and identity building process. Students invest in language learning when they see social or economic benefits, and that they respond and engage more when they use authentic cultural texts. So if we are just giving them stories that come from the United States or other cultures and not their own culture, what are we doing in the classroom? Are we empowering them? Or are we facilitating the way for them to, you know, hate English and be like marginalized and feel like, okay, esto no es pa' mí, you know? Because it happens. Even though sometimes I bring this myth, I put it in Spanish, I put it in English, they still don't want to talk. So what's going on? So these are conversations that we need to have. You know, yeah, there is an economic benefit to learning English, but do they see it? Are they invested? Okay, they might be motivated, but they might not be invested. And then there's, which Dorina also mentioned, translanguaging, code meshing. How can we allow students to use the English that they have, the English that they know? Let's just allow them to speak the way that, or write in the way that they want to write initially, because sometimes we are very purists when we teach. We want them to just stick to English, but maybe if we implement this practice of code meshing, which is not the same as code switching, it's very different. Code meshing is blending more than one dialect, language, or speech pattern in oral or written communication. And there's something that we have a Puerto Rican dialect, our Boricua, el dialecto Boricua. There's even an Instagram page or a Facebook page on it, right? Why don't we allow students to first, you know, use English, but if you wanted to insert your Spanish or your dialecto Boricua in the essay, do it, all right? And then we'll work on that essay, or we'll work on that exercise that you have. This practice of allowing the students to write the way that they feel like it allows students to express and explore their cultural identity and the fluidity of language use in real life communications, because sometimes this happens. Sometimes I'm checking the comments on YouTube and I see people writing in Spanglish or mixing the languages, so why don't we allow it in our classrooms? For example, I always ask my students to write a summary at the end of the class, and that's not the actual thing that they wrote, it's just something that represents how they write. Today we talk about the Taínos, and I'm like, perfect, I understood what you wrote. Next class, I'll teach you how to fix one word today, right? And then every day, after they finish the class, I'll tell them, okay, it's today with a Y, today with a Y. And then I'll go with the talk, right? Because verbs are important. Let's fix talk, T-A-L-K. But I don't necessarily say, oh, that's wrong, you don't know how to write, because those kind of comments, you know, might alienate them. Or, for example, something that I've done, I had a student who wasn't very proficient in my advanced English class. I told them, okay, just write everything in English. If you don't know the word, just put it in parentheses in Spanish. And that could be a possibility. The Taíno people creían que the yucca plant era sagrada and estaba connected to the dioses, right? And obviously, if you're exigente como yo, you're gonna tell them, okay, this is great, this is the first draft. Let's revise it, and let's put it into academic English. And teaching through strengths, right? If they're using students' cultural background, there's something called culturally relevant teaching. And I just like to read this quote: "What lies beneath the surface is what the traditional educational system has ignored. The rich wealth of knowledge of those communities and their ways of thinking and being in the world, the languages they speak, and their way with words." I posted all of these sources on the back of the handout in case you want to explore them. But fortunately, don't have a lot of time for this activity, but I do want to still hand it out. How would you teach this Taíno myth? So what I would do, because I think I sent you, I gave you guys this worksheet that I used back then, and I graduated from the UPR ever since then, and I learned a lot of new things. And I had these questions, right? I always say plagiarism, no plagiarism, exactly. And then I had all of these questions and they would have to reply. And I'm not sure if this activity kind of, when I use Spanish, no sé si cubría todas las necesidades de los estudiantes, especialmente those who were beginners, right? So what I would do if I were to teach this class again, I would think about which of my students are at which level. If there's a student who is at a beginner level of English, then their activity with the myth would be something related to vocabulary development, visuals, and movement. If they were at a basic level, they could produce short sentences, they can produce short conversations. Then let's focus on reading comprehension, discuss some questions so they can develop their writing. And if they're a little bit more intermediate, they can produce long sentences. If they can, maybe draft an essay, even with mistakes, it's fine. Maybe we can encourage them to code mesh and inspire them to do like critical analysis questions like the last one here, the really long one that I'm expecting 3 sentences, or that could be an entire essay, right? So on the QR code that you have in the back of your handouts, you will see everything that I created with this lesson. You can scan it there and you will find a presentation that I have with the Taíno vocabulary, and you would probably present, first the Taíno vocabulary, the Spanish vocabulary, and the English vocabulary, and then with those beginner level students, begin that way. This is something that I used AI to build. It's beautiful. You can put those words in the Magic AI or whatever, maybe Copilot, and create the practice exercises. Other resources. Ever since I taught this in 2020, 2021, but these 2 videos, they were published last year. So I would have taught this myth with these videos. This is Indigenous Taíno Fight Puerto Rico for Visibility and Rights. That's an amazing video. It's a 6-minute video. And then this one, Yucahu, Remembering Our Taíno Spirituality. And they're both in English. They have Spanish within them because they're using both languages in the videos. So I love them. Don't have time to show them, but the conclusion. What do I want you to leave with today? Language learning is most effective when it is meaningful and relevant. Identity and culture and students' first language can be assets in the classroom, not barriers. Strategies like code meshing can be used to enhance learning experiences in the classroom. And I hope you leave today inspired to integrate more cultural content and our Boricua history and culture and anything into your teaching practice. And I created, I don't know if you know, Canva has this amazing thing where there's a lot of Taíno icons. Yeah, and I used them all throughout the presentation. I deleted everything else and I added them. And it's interesting how commercialized these ones are. This one, I think everyone knows this one, right? Yeah. Everyone has seen it, the semi, but maybe this one, that one, not very common, but they're still part of Taíno. And something a suggestion that I have is that when you teach this, you can take your students on a field trip to Tibes, in Ponce, and Caguana, in Utuado, which are, it could be a whole unit, You could be with this myth for 2 months doing different activities in the classroom. I didn't have time for the workshop, but maybe something that you can do with this, it's to help you plan your own activity, plan your own lesson, and you can use this myth from 6th grade up to 12th grade. It's adaptable. And something that I want to leave you with is inspired to use our culture to teach our students. I know we probably don't have the resources in our classroom because I don't know if anybody has this book. in their classrooms. I bought it on Amazon. I wish it were available in my classroom, and I had 30 copies of it in my classroom, but unfortunately I don't. So I just, photocopied it. Well, I had photocopied it before. Stories from Puerto Rico. It's also in the bibliography, so that you can find it out. You'll probably see this cover. It's been updated because I bought that long ago. Now this is the cover. Yeah. And there's a lot of other stories here. Yeah. They have an audio download. It's in Spanish, actually. I was thinking of recording myself reading the myth, but I was too busy to do that. But there's the Teto Salcedo, Juanina, Olivia Monserrate, a lot of different legends and myths in this book, so it's really pretty. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Myers, for your presentation. I think we all started to evaluate, right? How are we gonna start integrating a little bit more of our culture into our classrooms, right? We know teachers that work in the Department of Education right? We have curriculum maps, but we can, play around with our curriculum maps, right? And we can see how can we integrate culture within our classrooms, not only in November, que es el Día de la Puertorriqueñidad, right? We should integrate it in other aspects, right? So thank you very much. I ask everyone to give her a hand of applause because this is her first time presenting. Okay, thank you. And please, let's evaluate her before we continue because we have.
I wanted to say something. She said that this was to be used for 6th graders and up. Right now, I was just finishing natural weather, 2nd grade. We were talking about hurricanes and we were talking about tornadoes and we were talking about, and then this is something, if I would have had it,
You could have used
I
it.
would have introduced the topic with this.
Okay.
Because this is gonna take me to the what academic language like huracan. This is what is called huracan, and then
Yes.
just keep on going from there.
Exactly.
And that would have taken me to this.
Exactly.
So thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you,
And
Mayor.
I'm talking about elementary. So we're limiting ourselves. We should say this is every grade.
Every grade. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna continue now with Dr. Dorito, that she's gonna be our closing speaker. So